a worthy discussion.
So I have Charlie with me today, Charlie Brooks from Australia, joining me on Grail Country. So Charlie, so tell me what brings you to Grail Country today?
Um, a lot of really different things. I've been going through Tolkien again, and sort of really trying to think about the realm of the fairy, and a lot
Mm,
of what I see with the talks on perennialism, on mysticism, and sort of the way in which sort of hermetics are engaged with in sort of this little corner has a lot to say about with Tolkien and fairy and what that is and how it relates to language itself, how it relates to being. Um, because yeah, it's a very bizarre sort of sentiment. Um, and I also want to sort of debate, I guess, or explore with you a bit more on the work of James Lindsay and New
okay,
Discourses, because
okay.
there's a lot that I've been sort of looking at, and the way that you've been critiquing Lindsay um, looks like it looks like a lot of other things that I've been seeing in a lot of different patterns, and it relates to Jordan Peterson and the way that he's perceived in the public image. It relates to how I see uh, people on the outside criticizing religious people, and it relates to sort of how people deal with addiction and stuff like that. There's a lot in there, but yeah, those are the two things that I'm really interested in talking about with you today. So yeah,
Sure,
that's the easy way.
sure. Okay, so let's backtrack a little bit. Let's follow the liturgy of the of this little corner here a little bit, and
Yeah.
just in the context of like, why don't you tell me like how you became interested in Lindsay in the context of telling me like some of your story, and like
So
why what do you think I'm getting wrong? What do you think that I'm missing and getting wrong about Lindsay? And just to be clear, Grill
yeah.
Country audience is probably going to be slightly confused because I've never actually talked about Lindsay on Grill Country. So
Mm,
Charlie is talking about like conversations that have happened in a private little group that we belong to, where
mm,
I have made some critiques about James Lindsay there. So that's what he's referencing.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
then just really quickly, my essential critique of Lindsay is that he doesn't know he doesn't know what mysticism is, and he
Yeah.
doesn't know what Gnosticism is,
Hmm.
and that as far as I can tell, he just wants modernity. He just wants modernity forever
Hmm.
without end.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So yeah, that's a really good summation of um, what I think he can put himself forward as.
mm-hmm.
It's he's not that, but because he comes from the new atheist movement, he has that if only we could all be rational beings kind of posture about it. And also I think he's just a little bit on the spectrum.
Yeah, I
So
think I
he
agree with that. I agree. I don't think he can help the way he thinks.
yeah,
I actually
yeah,
do
no.
think that. I think that, and I think he's just. I don't think he's dishonest. Let me be very
Yeah,
clear
yeah,
about
yeah.
that. I do not think he is a
Mm.
dishonest or disingenuous operator. I just think he's wrong.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's a really interesting thing because like he will probably also just is like easily enter into a discussion with you because as far as all he's doing is he's reading what he's trying to read and interpreting what he's trying to interpret. There's no agenda that he's trying to spin on it. There's no intentional blind spot that he's putting on any of the works that he's going through. I'll do a
Yeah,
quick
I just
backtrack
think that
to sort of
modernity
yeah,
is the not the epistemological paradigm of modernity is very comfortable for someone who is hyper left brain.
yes,
And so
yes, I
there are
definitely agree
clear
with that.
psychological reasons why he would not want to see
Mm-hmm.
an end to modernity. And
Yeah,
I don't think and I would say I don't want to see an end to modernity either. What I want to see is for us to pass through it.
yeah, 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 yeah. I think he is unwittingly acknowledging that. So I'll quickly like
Okay.
some my sort of following of Lindsay and how I sort of followed him and myself into the little corner with Vanderklay and everybody. I started as a poet, and I was doing slam poetry events and nights, and I could quite easily say that I put myself as a social justice warrior at one point, where I was virtue signaling everything to the idea that I was a good person. And I see Jordan. I ran into Jordan Peterson, and I was like, oh, okay. I need I need to really, really understand what's actually happening in my life right now. And sort of, he was that really like foundation shattering thing. And it was interesting because,
What was it? What was it in particular? As close as you can put a as
oh
close as you
yeah,
can put a fine point on it, like what was it that really got through to you in what Peterson was saying?
you could fit many books with what you don't know.
Okay.
Like pretty much exactly that sentence that he said. Because one of the big sort of what would you call it, standard bearing of a social justice warrior is trans rights. And I think that hollow affirmation to somebody else for the distinct fact that they merely feel uncomfortable and different, and you are a good person because you acknowledge their own discomfort and support them in whatever way they do it. And you're just like, I'm a great person and I support your identity. And Jordan comes in and goes like, you just don't know. Like you
Mm-hmm.
don't know yourself, you don't know your world, you don't know the relationship that you have with your identity. Like there is like, and that sort of that immediacy of doubt that he sort of put into the world was just like, oh, okay. But the interesting thing is, like, it was for the
But
first two
do,
years,
do you
maybe.
think like
Yes.
I mean in terms of that, I mean to me that's kind of an expression of the that's sort of an expression of the principle of learned ignorance. And so
Mm.
I would affirm that. And certainly, do you think that do you think that that Peterson perhaps might want to apply that to himself sometimes though?
Yeah. Um,
What especially when you I mean there are because he also has limited access to
yeah.
certain things, right? So he doesn't I
Yeah.
mean
I think yes, this does apply to learned ignorance, but there's also we also run into the really big problem of it's much easier to criticize something than it
yeah,
is to defend
right.
something. And so Jordan is really good when he is asked to sort of either like mainly sort of like stand up against criticism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people really did. The main reason he got attention was because he composed himself when there was a large amount of pressure against his position. And so he was defending it. To see, and like, it is one of those things, to build something is much harder, and to sort of embody the wisdom that you have when you're defending something or when
Right.
you're sort of standing up against something, it's much different
So
than
to
when you're
me, the
building
best
something.
part of what Peterson was doing is that he was inviting people to examine themselves
Mm-hmm.
first. So this this
He
this is
was.
this is the aspect of what he was doing that was healthy. But
Mm-hmm.
I at
Yeah.
sometimes he seems to not follow his own advice because
Yeah. I
he
like. I mean, him
because
going on tours.
he seems to be offering a whole slew of solutions
Mm-hmm.
as how we can fix the world.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of evidence that we can point at that Jordan hasn't fully examined himself either.
Nah. Yeah. I think that's very true. I think it's what I see. What I see he does is he invites you into that space, but that space does not give you like it gives you humility. It doesn't give you license to sort of more pride. It was like, oh, I know I'm wrong, so I'm gonna now carry on and carry on. It's like, no, no, no. You actually know you're wrong. You should actually try to speak less. And I think like he's sort of like talking about how Jordan basically like gives everything in his head a very like a large megaphone.
Mhm.
No matter really what it actually does or actually says, and whether it's a snide joke or
He's at his
he
best
just
when
sort
he's
of
in
like,
conversation,
mm,
as I think most of us are,
yeah,
because that is the way that's the only way that we can get access to the things that we're not seeing.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the
I mean,
more,
his,
and so
mm-hmm.
the larger your circle of conversation is,
Mm-hmm.
and the more different perspectives you invite in, the more you're going to be able to self-correct.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely, and I see that. He's turning out too many conversations for me to keep track of right now,
Oh yeah.
honestly. And they all don't seem they're not like considering how good his conversation with Viveki and his last podcast with Ian McGilchrist. Like I just like I don't need you to talk to a mafia boss right now, guy. Like I don't need you to deal with your business
Well, that's
partners or
because he
anything
seems
like
to have
that.
more than one mission going on at the same time.
Well, that's the thing. Like to go back to sort of explaining the story with like Peterson, like for the first 2 years, I thought I was going through a political evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
I thought social justice warrior was merely politics, was merely like, you know, how you engage and operate in a society and what your ideas on a society was. And so like I thought it was political. And I was just like, and Jordan was always trying to point to something deeper than political, but it was very easy for you to just grab and just put, you know, other people and tap him into associations to being, oh, you're against left wing, so blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
And so it took me a long while to understand that what I believe he was trying to do and what I still believe that he's trying to do, and I think his best work is he is trying to point to the realm of meaning as equal to the realm of materiality.
Mm-hmm.
Like the realm of meaning, the thing that like gives us will and gives us drive, that's real in a semblance of it is as real to us as everything else around us, probably more real when we actually try to give it
But when he
more
talks about
credence.
that, the way he talks about that, I still have concerns
Mm-hmm.
because he's tying meaning essentially to utility,
Mm-hmm.
right? So he's saying that we don't. He'll say things like we don't actually perceive objects, we perceive uses. But this is part the perception of uses is part of the problem from my
Mm-hmm.
perspective as someone who has a more mystical approach.
Yeah, because it's
Like,
utilitarian and it kills things.
right, it looks
Yeah.
then you're looking at everything as if it exists for your use,
Mm-hmm.
and to tie that to meaning to me
Mm-hmm.
is like that's not that isn't what I that's not really what when I
Mm-hmm.
think of meaning, that's not what I think of.
No, yeah. There was I was listening to um Rafe Kelly talk with Paul Check. He and Paul Check said something. Paul Check's very out there, and I
I don't know
appreciate
him. I
his.
know Rafe, but I don't know the other guy.
Yeah, no, he's a very woo person, but he's actually said some of the most clear things in I don't know what you would call it aside from like the spiritualist camp, like the Aubrey Marcus kind of
Mm-hmm.
uh thought sort of
Okay.
spheres. And he said like it was about breath, but it has something to do with meaning, in my opinion, as well. It's like breath is the mechanism by which an entity can create cause. And I like that idea just because it transferred like essentially like the action of breath is just the thing that an object has to do to affect the area, the way a tree breathes, the way like an ocean breathes. And in that sense, it separates itself from killing the object because it's existing outside of the object. It's the action that allows the object to extend beyond itself. And it still defines itself within what you need to call it as a category that defines meaning, because meaning is what holds a thing together almost more than has a use.
Right.
It's the like the you can see it as use, but only
but that
if
right
you
exactly but
ignore
that
who's
is
holding it.
right. Yeah, that's the problem. And I think like how do I want to say
He
this?
leaves it open. I think he does leave it open.
Well, it's not.
Like
Yes,
I
he. It's not like it's the only way he talks about it.
yeah, yeah.
I just like there's that when he talks about it in that way, I'm like, that's a
Mm-hmm.
recapitulation of the garden.
Yeah, definitely,
That's
definitely,
that
and
is just like that is like. And here's the thing. Okay, so he's not wrong. Okay, so here's the thing. I will grant that in terms of the way the world lays itself out, he is factually correct
mm,
because duality is a factual state of our post Eden world. We have fallen into duality. We live in
are
a world of
divided.
duality. We are faced with the problem of action. We have to decide between the yes and the no.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that the problem is seeing that as the final word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
As they're seeing no opening within that closed circle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Um, there's I think that I think, yeah, pushing towards that idea, like, I think he always pushes towards the idea of, like, I think the more important thing that he tries to talk about is that zone of proximal development, where
Mm-hmm.
it's like that the place in which you must understand the world has to be on the border between order and chaos. And I think that applies to worldviews as well, because I think there is a point where you can go like where it like say you become this utilitarian thing that only sees value. You could probably order your life better than what you did before, but now that you're there, you have to take on the next sphere of realization, or the next layer of sort of understanding where those values align and what those values dictate and when they dictate. And that's how I see it, sort of always sort of transcending from the object in the immediate sphere. I think, Peterson allows, I think, like, would the worry actually also be the fact that he can allow people to stay in one sphere a bit easier than sort of challenge themselves to move
Yeah, that's
beyond
my
the
concern,
spheres
and
as a
I see
process?
in the Peterson sphere, I see that. I
Mm-hmm.
see a lot of people that are just like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
um, this is the we live in a world of duality, and the best we can hope for is proximal betterment.
Yeah.
The end,
Yeah, that
and
end.
that's not a good enough story.
No, well, I mean, but that's why I think like the best is when he tries to talk about like things that most people think are ephemeral or useless are actually the most important things, like the meaning, creativity, imagination, like that is like a very, very
Yes,
integral.
that are precisely valuable in that they are because they are useless. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So, and it's not like there are no aspects of him getting this. Like he does have like,
yeah. Mm,
I don't want to misrepresent him, and I don't dislike him.
mm.
I just think that sometimes, but I don't, I mean, we all screw up
Yeah,
and we all get things
yeah,
wrong.
yeah.
And, and I'm not a critic.
Mm.
Um, but, it's not, he's
No,
certainly not
he's in
someone
his.
I he's not someone I looked I don't think I don't think what he has to say is as important as what John is doing though. Viveki, I mean.
Yes,
Because
yes,
I think
I agree. I think, like, to me, like, Peterson's allowing something to happen. Peterson's allowing something to change culturally, and with that change, Viveki's allowed. I think that's like Viveki's allowed to sort of grow his mission more, and his mission's sort of allowed to sort of happen. I don't know. It's like,
Well, no, and Peterson deserves credit for
yeah.
elevating Vervaeke, right?
Mm.
More
Oh God,
people,
yeah.
more people are listening to John because of Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, I am.
and there are, here's the thing. It's they're made there are still people who probably need Jordan's message
Mm-hmm.
before they're ready to hear what John is having to say.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like the I don't know, like just how long have you been following Jordan? Was 2016, 17
Yeah,
or
pretty much from the beginning.
yeah, okay. Like, do you have this did you see this politicization of him and this political sort of
No,
sequestering of him?
he's become, well, I think it's a natural product of, like, let's I mean, human nature, right? So it
Mm.
he I don't he's gotten more political over time, in my opinion. And
Ah.
I think the reason he has is because the people who are giving him love
Mm-hmm.
and who are listening to what he has to say mostly are coming from the right.
That's interesting because I
So
would actually say
I
he's less
mean,
political.
you think he's less political? Oh,
Yeah,
let me hear why you perceive me like, okay, this is interesting because we have a clash of perceptions. So let's
definitely
let's
because
let's let's see why.
I see him as less political because he is largely addressing every problem as an individual problem, whereas previously what I saw him doing was criticizing the left's approach to a problem. And so, like, he was giving the devil his due. He was making sure that he was, not giving them a straw man. He was giving them as like an honest an opinion of them, like as he always does with like postmodernism or anything like that. But it was always against this oppressive political characterization. And I think maybe because it was more like politically extreme times, because the Trump thing happened and everything kind of like either ratified or completely discombobulated people's political perspectives. But there was like immediate politicization that put people into parties, and he was the one that was like that was almost like calling out each of the sides, and and it probably was more of a factor of the time, in my opinion, and what he was sort of starting to do was like he was about to be known, and he was like, you know, men, you help men, or you help the
But tell me,
Western civilization.
like, what meaningful criticism have you ever heard Peterson make of right liberalism, which is his own perspective politically?
um
I've never heard it. Even when he's
the
gotten really, really good pushback from people like Ian McGilchrist, who he
yeah,
basically just
yeah.
like he
It,
tried to
it
change the subject on him, basically.
it's all I think Peterson's criticism on the right is basically from a libertarian. It's like you have to like to allow libertarian being like this, I don't know, frame or worldview for natural consequence of what happens when borders aren't maintained. And he's just like, you got to let nature take its course somewhere. You have to be in dialogue with it, and that doesn't mean you're dictating the conversation. So, like, I mean, specifically, like there was a lot of stuff where he was going against populism, specifically within the right. The Kavanaugh hearing was a big one specifically. I remember him
Right, which
talking
is
about.
not his perspective, because
Yes.
he's a right liberal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he is absolutely within the classical liberal political spectrum and on the right of
Yeah.
that spectrum. I have never heard him say
Mm-hmm.
anything critical of his own viewpoint.
Of his own viewpoint. Yeah, I would say that's probably because like he just
Like,
thinks that
he'll
he needs to be in
never
a dialogue with it.
well, I mean,
He,
but wait, but no, why is there it's liberalism has been the dominant political thinking
Mm-hmm.
in in the UK, in Australia, and in North
Yeah.
America for the last 40 years, 50
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
And it's what got, and I also think his thesis that postmodernism is connected to Marxism is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a natural consequence of liberalism. It's liberalism
Well,
working
then,
itself out to its logical end.
yeah, no, I definitely agree. So, like, I would say then the best points of criticism that he would have for his own viewpoint is basically we haven't sorted out anything that we've done in the last 40 years. Like, nearly every decision we've made just because we could make it and we never thought about it. Like the birth control, um, sort of the pill, for example. He was just like, we don't understand what that did to our society. We don't understand the shift that it made in economics and stuff like that. I don't think that's like, you know, a deep enough criticism, but it's
Right, right,
true.
right, right. But there are people. Here's the thing, though.
Mm,
There are people that would agree with him on that we need traditional values who are not
mm-hmm.
right liberals, right?
Yes.
So he's like this. I made this criticism recently that he's putting together this
Yeah,
group
this
to
is
like
on
kind of
Raj's talk.
yeah to
Mm-hmm.
resist the World Economic Forum, and he's doing this in the UK. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I think that the British post liberals need to be invited to the table for that discussion, because their
Mm-hmm.
upholding of traditional values would put them very much against what the WF is doing. But they also have,
Mm-hmm.
from my perspective, legitimate critiques of capitalism.
Definitely.
And I
I was
also
thinking
think the
about
other
this
problem
listening.
is that Peterson seems to have no conception of the socialism that is not Marxism, but Christian socialism pre-existed Marxism.
Mm-hmm.
And Marxism is
Yeah.
essentially a materialist subversion of the principles of Christian socialism.
Yeah. Was
And the
that what
problem is the
Chesterton was?
materialism, not the socialism.
Yes. The thing that I was listening to sort of your critique on the anti-WEF. I don't know what to call it yet. It doesn't make
It
sense
doesn't
in
have a
my
name
mind.
yet.
Yeah, the thing that has no name.
We'll call it the
Um,
few. We'll call it the few because it's an inversion of the WEF acronym.
yeah,
The few.
yeah, because I agree. I think like having a discourse with like the widest possible view. The one problem I was coming up in my head was like we always had we always had places where there was the widest amount of people possible. The problem is the extremes take over, and it's mainly because I don't know, the war on attention and stuff like that. Like I was like this is what happened with poetry. Like poetry's always been like this, I don't know, liberal, like sort of kind of pseudo radical place and position, and it was fine for me for 2013 2014. As the years go on, the
I don't
extremes
know.
go
Ezra
so
Pound
much.
was a poet, man.
Yeah, the extremes get to a point
Nietzsche's
where
a
I was
hell of a
just like,
poet.
whoa. Yeah,
So
like I mean, and oh, like Saul Williams, like he's one of the greatest poets that I've ever seen, and he was just like, I'm listed as a terrorist because I side with Antifa, and I'm like, whoa, okay, like, but it became a place that did unwelcome ideas and did unwelcome sort of volatile relationships. Like some of my I still have good relationships within the poetry community, but they're individuals, and these individuals almost they have their own bargaining relationship with me where they're like they know what they think, they know what I think, but we also know that we have more value
yeah, if
within this
poetry
art.
becomes ideologically possessed, we've got a problem.
It's very easy. It's very easy. And I think there's this. Yeah, there's so much I can say about that. So like that was the one pushback I had on the few incorporating as many people as possible is to do it in a way that makes sure that everybody can discuss on an equal footing without feeling pushed, pressured, or provoked or captured.
Right.
which I think
I
can
think anyone
happen.
who thinks that dialogue is legitimate should have a seat
Yeah,
at the table.
that's a really good way. And I think, yeah, Cornell, I think Cornell West 100% would be a beautiful like contributor, but
Mhm.
also like Saul Williams. And Saul Williams is possibly one of the most articulate of, to go back to Lindsay, like the Ferrerian, Marcusian sort of academic ivory woke sort of concepts that come from it. And I think that's actually the way where good value can come from his contributions, because I mean his poetry is entirely mystical, and has been for an incredibly long time. And that's where like a large amount of the chaos comes in. But there's also but that's where I think his value can come in. I don't know whether or not that discourse can happen. And I don't know, like, it's hard when you have so many extremes to make people continue on Philae Sophia as opposed to try to be Philae Nikeia.
Mhm.
Um, and all right, I'm going to bring this in very importantly now, because this is a big problem that I see, that I think that you point out the affirmative example, and a lot of people see, and a lot of people bring into a negative example. And that is the idea of like a philosophy, an idea, and what you do with it. And what I see a lot of people do is they take the idea and they project it onto the world.
Mhm.
And that's that killing place of it, where they don't, where if it's out of alignment, it has a place in their worldview, but that if it's out of alignment, it's wrong, it's evil, because they've tied their perception to the idea. So now their identity is ingrained with what they see in the
Right.
world.
Right.
And what I see Peterson doing when he's good, and like
And none
what
of
I
us
see
is good
everybody.
all the time.
Amen. Amen. And like, yeah, when I see myself, what I see when as Luke would say, is like when I'm egoic, or when I'm in like my egoic world, like that is how I react. Um, and when it's good, it's reflecting. And so what I think reflecting is taking ideas and then seeing where it applies and fits into your life, and seeing where it can connect and where you can find a common ground with it. I don't think that necessarily is always like, I think that can be imbalanced, and I think you can take on board, but I think you can only be imbalanced if you're only seeing what you're wanting to be reflected at you. If you can
Right.
take things that you're uncomfortable with and reflect on it just as much as you can take something that
No, that's right. It's like I talk a lot about how like I'm always the reason I asked that question about Peterson and interrogating his own political viewpoints is like I'm doing that with my own Christian
oh yeah,
anarchism all the time, like constantly.
yeah.
I'm constantly like questioning it, reevaluating it, seeing if it still holds up,
Mm-hmm.
seeing what parts of the picture that I'm missing,
Mm-hmm.
and just trying to say what I see, and I never have the assumption. By the way, I never assume that I have it right.
Yeah.
I'm saying
Yeah.
based on what I see,
Yeah.
this is what appears to make the most
Mm-hmm.
sense to me.
Yeah. And like the thing that, like, yeah, like I would say, I would echo that sentiment. And I would also say on top of that, it's just like, how do I explain this to somebody that allows them to see the virtue, and allows them to also call out the error? Because I think that's also really hard, because if I
You
explain
have
an
to be
idea
willing
wrong.
to look at what you got wrong.
Yeah, definitely.
You have
And
to
you
you have
also
to be
have,
willing. Go ahead.
mhm. And you also have to be
By
willing
the
to
way, I
sort
will
of
tell you
make
the
that.
number one critique I make of myself all the time in my Christian anarchist principles is that if I'm working
Hmm.
philosophically, it lines up for me. It makes the most
Yeah.
sense out of what it makes the most sense out of the way I read the scriptures.
Mm-hmm.
and the way I see reality.
Mm-hmm.
Thus,
Yep.
the thing that challenges it the most is proximal betterment.
Yeah.
And that's a serious challenge. So the idea of proximal betterment and the idea that we are in fact in in this world, in a world that does contain duality,
Mm-hmm.
that mean and that the
Mm-hmm.
political realm is entirely concerned with that,
Yes.
which is
And
one of the problems,
it's
by the
projective.
way, which is one of the problems, by the way, of looking at it as the only way to solve every
Mm-hmm.
problem, is
Yeah.
because the political realm can only ever deal in
Yeah.
the world of fact.
Mm-hmm.
Fact is not truth.
Yeah.
Fact is
It's
not truth.
definitely. I think there's an interesting thing that oh God, yeah, 100% fact is not truth. The proximal
Well,
development
James
thing
Lindsay would
actually,
be triggered as hell by that.
fact is not truth. No, well, I mean, yeah, probably in some way, because I think he would say that I the one thing that I would say with Lindsay is he doesn't understand what, like, in the same way, like you say, he doesn't understand what mysticism is. I would like turn the volume down as like he doesn't know what superstition does. Like he doesn't know what like people's behavioral like mechanisms within ritualistic behavior, like like we were talking about the useless things, the
Right.
immaterial things. He doesn't understand.
The
He
things that
doesn't
we
quite.
do not approach with our propositional understanding at all.
Mm. He sees them. He sees them as the inverse, and he sees them as divorced from the sort of the truth that can come out of them because he
Well,
can appreciate.
they're divorced from the world of fact because we
Yeah.
don't know them like that.
No.
That
And
isn't the way we know them because
mm-hmm,
they're largely inarticulable.
mm-hmm, yeah, there's this interesting thing that projective versus reflective um, sort of perception on philosophy and value does for me. The first one is if it's projective, you are judged by it and you are more compelled to either condemning others or leading yourself down a bad path. If you're reflective of it, you're actually less able to perform any action at all
Mm-hmm.
because you're less associated to the value. Say, like, because this was the value that I had to do when I quit smoking. Like in a really simple paradigm. I was smoking. I was a chef as well. I was a
Oh,
bartender. Yeah, yeah. Smoked so much, and it was 10 years of like a serious addiction. My parents hated it.
me too. By the
It,
way, when
yeah.
I was a line cook and a sous chef, I would smoke.
Oh
I
yeah.
smoked all the time.
That's how you get breaks, man. Um, it's insane. And
Yeah.
like, but the thing that, and there was times that I did want to quit and I did hate it. And like, Peugeot always talks about like that little demon that you give a little bit of energy to. And I was like, yep, 100% makes sense, buddy. But like 3 years ago, 3 years ago, I had this. I ran out of cigarettes. I woke up. My housemate had some. I could easily have stolen one, but I was like, how about I don't? Just this one cigarette. And I'm like, how about I just this one cigarette? I like just say no to, and then maybe the next one I can also say no to. And what I was doing was I was actually making myself not quit. I was making myself only say no to one cigarette. And so I was giving my judgment from my action away. I'm not quitting. I'm not doing anything great or grand. I'm actually just doing this one thing. And then what was actually even more important when I hit like, I don't know, 4 week mark was I realized that all of the problems that would be solved once I quit were never going to be solved once I quit. They're just going to look different. And that was actually really important for me to realize. Like, I think there's a big problem, and Lindsay does, you do see it in Lindsay a little bit, I think. Not as much, but it's this idea of, if this happens, if you do this, it's good. If you do this, it's bad. And in the value, yes. To the value, yes. But to you as an individual, as a being, about the same. And that neutrality, that presence within the single act, that's what I think that mystical experience, that mysticism is. Because I think that you can see sorcery,
Yeah, it breaks you
and
specifically.
mysticism.
It's an experience of unity, which breaks you out of the duality,
Yeah, and
so that
that
you see
dual
that it's
and that
not that all there is, that is not all there is.
yeah, and that is where you see it, because you're trying to separate yourself from the value, or you're trying to separate your action from the value, because the more you tie your action to the value, the more you're projecting, the less you're reflecting. And
Well, you're working on being a physical trainer, right?
mhm,
So, like one of the like so one of the ways of describing the mystical experience is the experience of unity. But I also think that what John Vervaeke calls the flow state in his work is another way of
mhm,
this is another form of mystical experience,
yeah,
and it is also and it is properly mystical experience, because that it is what it is that it is an experience of unity. It's not like you're not really thinking about what you're doing
mhm,
when
yeah.
you're in a flow
Have you
state.
or
You're
even
operating as a unity, as a functional
no, no,
unity, and it's very practical too.
yeah, it's a stranger thing than that. Like, you get it
Okay.
in performance, you get it in strength. I think that there's an interesting thing with experience where you push yourself past a threshold of yourself, and you allow yourself to be in a place that you would not think that you could tolerate, and you would not think that you can maintain. So, have you ever taken an ice bath?
No, I haven't.
That's that's a very that's a very good example of a mystical experience, when you attune yourself to your body, because you actually really have to, you're going against your physical reaction. You're going against your action, going, everything is fucking spiked in temperature. And what we normally do is we do a feedback with it, and that feedback just escalates and escalates and escalates, and you end up having more pain when you breathe heavier, because you're breathing heavier because you're in
Yeah,
pain, and
right.
you have more pain, and it carries on. It's the same with strength and stretching. Like, strength and flexibility, they're not just your muscles. In fact, they have very little to do with your muscles. They have a lot to do with your brain's experience of the muscles under that stimulus. And so, what you're trying to actually do when you're stretching and when you're pushing yourself and you go to that place where you're in absolute agony, is you're trying to actually go, no, I'm not in agony.
Mm.
I'm actually okay. And I'm actually just need to relax. And again, if you do that, you will stretch more. You will stretch deeper, because you'll allow yourself to engage your muscles. Your brain will be then allowed to engage your muscles and go into a further, like, embodiment of that unity, of that flexibility,
Right, because
strength as well.
it's right because it's forcing you to go out of yourself
Mm-hmm.
in the
Yeah.
process of doing that, which is why it
Mm-hmm.
can lead to that experience.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why, like, I think it's actually really cool that within, like, popular culture, gym culture is coming around. I, have my doubts about the reasons people go, but everyone has doubts about the reason they go. It's what happens when they're in. That's the important bit. You can go for whatever reason you want, but you'll be transformed nonetheless, because doesn't matter your mindset. You still have to lift that thing. You still have to perform those reps. And there is no shortcut. Like, not even steroids, not even liver can help you. Um,
What? No
and
shortcuts?
no shortcuts, no shortcuts. Like, I mean, there is shortcuts, just do it more.
Yeah. Do it more. Yeah.
um, it is really interesting because yeah, it's that pushing away from yourself in terms of limitation. I talked about this with Luke and Rafe about faith as well as this experience that you do. Not like this was something that I sort of had to come to terms as I was sort of realizing I am becoming more of a Christian. I was like, faith is what you do, whether or not you know anything or nothing. Like, it's not about
Right.
doubt and it's not about certainty. It's about the trust in yourself and the world, and that unified
It's
relationship
required
is
for us to
real.
act in the world at all.
Period. Yes.
Period. You cannot
It's
act in the world without faith because your
no,
knowledge can never be perfect. So if you waited around
yeah.
for you to have a perfect assessment of anything, you would never do anything.
Yeah, you literally can't because like yeah, it's like I talked about like faith is like certainty that your internal reality matches your external reality. But like whether or not you have
And I
strong
wouldn't
faith or
say it's
weak faith,
certainty, it's
that's
trust. You trust. I don't think
trust. That's a better version.
certainty, I think, is off the table.
Yeah,
You
fair.
trust that they match. To the best of your
Mm-hmm.
knowledge, they match, and you trust it enough to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I would
Like
say
I
the more faithful the person you are, the less afraid you are to
mhm,
act.
definitely. And I would also say that to bring back to the reflection as well, is like you know you're in a true alignment with your faith when you doubt it.
Yes, this is that. Here's the so Rowan Williams, has this line about how like what the dark night of the soul it's breaking your own religion for your own good,
Yeah. Wow.
right?
Oh, wow.
Because that's a paraphrase, that's a paraphrase, but because it's not your religion, the structures that you have set up
Hmm.
are just they're pointers.
Yeah.
So like the original meaning of a dogma is signpost, right? So
Mm.
so dogmas are signposts that are supposed to lead you towards the real ultimately. And
Hmm.
sometimes the last barrier that needs to get broken for you before you can enter into an experience of the real is trying to filter it through
Mm.
your preconceived ideas within your system, within your
Yeah.
religion.
Yeah. It's like when Buddha became enlightened, he was an ascetic and he was like fasting and meditating for 40 days. And he became enlightened when he drank from a rice bowl. Like when he broke his
When he
fast, when he broke his meditation, that's when it
right.
happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's like it's one of those things, and like it is one of those almost conscious things because I think everybody's had this in a physical sort of paradigm. When
Yeah.
they think they're doing okay, that's when they get injured.
You can't not participate.
You can't not participate. When
It's
you're doing something, you're like, oh, I'm doing great. Oh, I'm doing great. Oh, bang. Like,
yeah, but
that's when it happens.
that's grace though.
That's
That's
it.
what
That's,
that's grace.
yeah.
You know.
It's just like,
So yeah,
remember
yeah,
what's going on.
yeah,
Remember
yeah,
that you could drop it.
yeah.
Um, it is that really true thing. Like, I, I haven't been in a while because young family and all of that. And my partner is not going in the same journey that I am. And I went to a Tridentine mass
Mm,
quite regularly, and I had this um, I had a real internal like struggle with myself because Peugeot is right. You do have to go into the real world, and I think that was the first thing I had to break. I had to stop thinking that the only way that I could be right was by learning. Like it had to be enacted, it had to be with the community, it had to be in a reel. And then I was like, okay, but I don't know how to shop for the church. I don't know how to choose. What is this choosing of a church? Do I just go Orthodox because, you know, yeah, I've been hearing a bunch of Orthodox, and I ended up going Catholic purely because my friend was just like, "Come." I was like, "Oh, fair enough." And then I found out it's one of the only Tridentine masses in the state, and I was just like, "Oh, this is really cool." But one of the things that is also really interesting is like that was the place that I had to wrestle with a lot of the convictions I had against the church before I was a Christian. That's
Right.
when, like, you know,
Were
my
you
parents,
raised Catholic?
no,
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 you just
I
kind of
was,
okay, okay.
my mom
So
is a
are
woo.
have you already have you been confirmed already, or are you going to RCA
No,
now,
no,
or
I was going through the catechizing process a year ago. And then partner became pregnant, and so I had other
okay?
more important things to do. Um, and I truly do actually mean that. Like, you know, the real like everything should help me onto my journey to be a
Hmm.
better person, and to be a better person is to
That's
be
okay.
there
I
with
used
my
to be a
partner.
Catholic, and I ended up becoming an Anglican. So,
Yeah, well, she's an Anglican,
oh, okay.
and she's a very, very ecumenical Anglican, and it's one of those. It's again, it's one of those things where I get to really, really like I get to wrestle with, and I get to understand. Um, and yeah, like those dogmas are things that you actually have to engage with, I'm realizing. Because some of some, like a lot of Catholic dogmas are really like, it's not that they're hard, it's that I don't see the reason in them.
Right.
It's like the perfect, the how Mary was never damaged. It's just like, oh yeah, okay. I don't know why though. I don't know why she needs to be damaged. Like physical damage doesn't need to have this association. But that is the thing. Like it can and it cannot, and you have to wrestle with these types of things.
Well, it's because of her
Um,
association with the church, and
Sorry.
it's actually specifically because of her association with the church. This is actually why, because she's essentially almost synonymous with the church.
Mm-hmm,
And because she is synonymous with the church, that makes her also synonymous with the new creation that is happening in Christ. So
mm-hmm.
therefore, she must be unbroken.
Interesting. But does as and this is just an open question to it, is that also them trying to reflect what they should be onto her?
I think it's well, it comes from several things. It comes out of the scriptures,
Mm-hmm.
right? It comes out of like particularly like Revelation chapter 12, the
Mm-hmm.
image of the woman clothed in the sun,
Mm-hmm.
which is which some people interpret as Mary, some people interpret as Israel, and some people interpret as the church, and they're all right. It's all true at
Yeah.
the same time.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Okay. I see that. I see that. It's
because
it's interesting.
Because Mary is of Israel, and she is
Hmm.
also the type. She's also the prototype of the church because she's
Hmm.
the God bearer.
Yeah. And that's the interesting thing also about the church is the church is the thing that you're is meant to be unbroken. You're meant to be like the individual's meant to be the thing that breaks and builds and grows and transforms. And the church is the unbroken line. And that's kind of the interesting thing about dogmas as well. It's like they are meant to be the thing that stands, and you're meant to be the thing that goes against and then eventually probably overcomes.
Right. But again, the dogmas are signposts. So that means that
Yeah.
we can come in, that means that our understanding of them, because they are signposts, change can change over time.
Hmm. Yeah.
Although
No, I
this
think,
tends to happen slowly.
yeah. That's the
But
same with physical experience, though.
no salvation outside the Catholic Church is understood differently post Vatican II than it was,
Yeah.
in the 19th century.
Yeah. That bit about like the history of the actual Catholic Church is probably the most overwhelming part about never going to a Catholic church. It's just like, wait, what? is going on, guys? I'm just here to read. Um, it is an interesting thing because like the physical experience is the same. Like I can just bring it back to just going to the gym and exercising. Like if you go to the gym, you will be transformed enough that what was heavy is now light.
Mm,
And you do actually have to consider those different weights differently.
right.
Otherwise, if you do it, you'll either not grow or you'll break.
Yep.
And it is interesting. Like the the question that I think is interesting about going back to Lindsay then
Mm-hmm.
is the mystical experience is the feminine. And so do you think there is actually something maybe in
And the but yes,
intentional?
it is the feminine. It is the feminine. But I think sometimes we think we have this idea of thinking of the feminine as solely passive, but
Mm,
it's not solely passive. It's
nope.
actually it's not solely passive at all. And I think that's where we get ourselves into trouble.
No,
It's
it's
more of
not.
a more of a creative activity than it is a passivity.
Agreed. I
A
100%.
receptive creativity actually is that's the phrase I want to use. It's a receptive creativity. That is how to properly understand it.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is like it's like Peugeot says, like naming it is is where trouble starts because that's when you're calling it into an explicit name or nature or like that's when it starts going weird. And I think that's
Yeah,
when
I think
mysticism
so
becomes
because I think
sorcery or
it's
something.
related. I think because it's related to the principle of growth. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you start when you try to name it, then it becomes more related to the principle of building than the principle of growth. And you're trying to control
Mm.
it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
which
Yeah. And I think that's the interesting thing is like the a lot of like religio, even though I understand that the church is the feminine of Christianity, the church is also like religion is the masculine part. Religion is almost like this masculine structure that is building itself, and you can actually fall prey to trying to build the structure as opposed to grow the self.
right, which I think are there to protect us in the realm of duality where we are necessarily embedded for the
Mm-hmm.
time being.
Yeah. What is the duality in your mind? Like, how do you see the duality?
I think
Is it
the best
spirit and
way
matter or?
no, I think the most fundamental duality is choice.
Mm,
Yes and no.
mm-hmm.
I don't
Yeah.
think
Okay.
like because and this is like sometimes we get and I think sometimes when we talk about God choosing, we confuse and we think that God's choosing is under the same kind of duality between the yes and the no that ours is. There is a way in which we
Yeah.
can say that God chooses, but because ultimately God's creation of the world is a choice, but
Hmm.
it was only ever affirmative.
Yeah.
It's only
Yeah.
ever affirmative. And after the fall, we no longer have that capacity to live in that let there be of the divine affirmative.
Yeah. Well, that's the interesting thing about sort of going back to the addiction
Just
path
really
is
quick
like
though,
go.
to go back to Mary real quick. It is
Yeah.
Mary is the one who echoes that back to the creator.
Yeah.
And this is the creative receptivity. So she does
Yes. 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 Yes.
something.
Yes. Yes.
She does
Oh yeah.
something.
Yeah.
And this
It's
to me connects the idea to Robert Jensen's idea of God as a conversation.
mm-hmm.
It's a call, like
Yeah.
it's almost this as if reality itself were a call and response.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like the thing that I was like got really excited about was my martial art is intensely liturgical
Oh, really?
because yeah, I do capoeira,
Okay.
the Brazilian dance fighting, and you can only play when the songs are happening, and the
Hmm.
songs are literally call and response.
Oh,
So there's like
okay.
ahead of the music, and he is singing, and normally he sings like songs and stories and all of this stuff, but like the songs that happen during a hada, which is means a circle, is like it's literally like I Sabent Misham, and then it gets
And
responded
and the response,
I.
right, and God's waiting on the response from us. So like the
Yeah.
creation groans in anticipation because the creation doesn't have a voice. It depends on us for the voice.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
we
yeah,
have
yeah,
to give voice to the creation and giving the response back to God,
yeah,
which
and
is
that's
what Mary
where,
ultimately accomplishes.
yeah, and that's also points to sort of how there is and there isn't moral relevant relativism as well, because he's calling you into a behavior, and so you could do something and you could also do the wrong thing, but it's actually not really about the yes or no. It's about the what are you doing forward to God? What are you offering first?
Right.
Like the offering is the first thing, and then the pathway to that offering is that emptying of yourself, is
Right.
that
Because he
sort
asks
of
all of it.
that
He
is
wants, he
is
doesn't,
is allowing that
right.
dialogue.
Yeah, he wants it all.
Yeah, to me the feminine is always a bringing in. It's not a enclosed space, it's not an open space, it's a bringing in action.
Right. And this is what, so this is like, so Tomberg talks about this in Meditations on the Tarot, because this is why specifically it is the seed of the woman that is that is the threat to the serpent, because it is that feminine action which breaks open the closed circle of the serpent
Ah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
and opens
That
us
makes
back
sense.
up to the spiral structure which is open to Sabbath.
Hmm. Did you watch or read The Sandman by Neil Gaiman?
Yes, I did not read it, but I did watch the first season of the series, and I've
Yeah,
read
so
I've read
like,
several other of Neil Gaiman's novels. I've read American Gods. I've both
hmm
watched Neverwhere and read the book.
hmm
So
he's
I've read
I
some of
really
his
like
short
Gaiman.
stories. Yeah, I like Gaiman too.
His Shakespeare stories are my favorite, the ones within the Sandman. But in that season, in the show as well, they did a pretty good job with it. When he is fighting um
Actually,
fighting the
game
demon.
Gaiman adaptations are better than a lot of adaptations because he's not snobby about the medium, so he's usually
No,
involved. So he'll
no,
usually
like, and
consult.
yeah, no, like I think I don't know, like there's he really is good because he really does care, and you can really see that. And
Mhm,
like when the Sandman is fighting to get his helm back from the demon in hell,
mhm.
um, the final like word game was the demon says like I am darkness, unencompassing, like all destroying, world devouring, universe ending, like I am anti-life equation, everything, and
Yeah,
then Dream's response, I am hope,
I'm Hope. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and it's
yeah.
just like,
I'm
yep.
Hope. Yeah, it's great, and that's actually particularly resonant because I don't know if you saw the latest of our meditations on the tarot conversation, but Hope was a huge
No, no,
theme.
yeah, I want to, but I feel like I have to start from the start
Well,
and get the
actually,
book as well.
so Tomberg actually relates like Hope to the principle of growth, which is also
Hmm.
connected with the feminine.
Yeah,
So
definitely. Well, definitely. It's like because hope is reconciliation. Hope is that it'll be okay. Like it is not a action in and of itself. Like I can't do hope to you. I can't
right.
provide, but you can provide
Well, and
hope.
reconciliation is the right word because reconciliation suggests a story that has a mutuality to its structure,
Yeah,
right? Because
and
there's no passive parties in a reconciliation.
yeah, and the interesting thing that is about that is like hope is one of the truly religious things then, because one of the things I always saw in myself before I sort of became a Christian, and what I see in a large portion of a lot of the secular circles that I go around is people are very against the idea of intentionally surrendering themselves to something. And in reconciliation, it is a giving of yourself. And in that giving of yourself, you are healed. But it is still a surrender. It is still a surrender. It is still something that is vulnerable,
Mhm.
and it is also almost entirely not to you, not for your benefit and stuff like
No,
that.
it
And it's like,
can't be. It's not. If it's for your benefit, then it's not a then it can't. You can't have a reconciliation.
yeah,
Yeah.
and like that's that space that that's that space that, oh my God, I was like, I thought we wouldn't get around to what I was talking about with all the Jordan Peterson tangents, but we're bringing everything up kind of beautifully. Um, that's that space that I think Tolkien is trying to talk about in Fairy. That's
Okay.
it's this it's a place that is non-egoic, that you go in with, like he said, like to enter Fairy, you must go in with the naivety of a child and the
Mhm.
innocence of a child. And I think he means innocence in a real sense of like everything that, like, you are not going to do anything here. You're not going to impose yourself onto anything. Everything is in dialogue with you and being shown with you, but you cannot push yourself out. You cannot decide what you think is correct. You can only go with that idea that you can only talk to what you see, because it feels like fairy is this place of language, and it's this place where you're no longer an individual. Like it's that when you and Luke were talking with Raj, it's that, and not anti-individualist, or it's this relational
Mhm.
aspect. It is where you are
Right.
no longer in a divisible self.
Right.
And like I see that like in like because I'm gonna get this right. Fairy is this place where you see all of the points of our meaning, and they all come together in dialogue, where nature, like, where nature is seen as it is, as opposed to in time. It's
Right.
out of time. You see the entire process
Yeah,
of it.
strange things happen. So, if there's strange things happen in time with time and fairy, um,
Mm,
I mean, clearly, like whatever. I mean, fairies seem to be like spirits of the earth,
yeah,
like they're connected to the earth.
yeah.
So, um, I don't really know. Actually, I don't know that if I've ever read. I'd ever actually read what Tolkien's views on fairy, but it's something I think a lot about.
Yeah.
I mentioned that I'm working on a Grail Country role playing game, and that like fairy is a huge aspect of
Oh yeah,
fairy
yeah.
is
I
actually a
definitely get
huge
in.
aspect of the Grail Country role playing game that I'm working on.
Oh,
Essentially,
definitely.
like the basic premise behind it is that what happens after Arthur passed into Avalon when he goes into the
Mm,
other world. So it continues the story from the other side. I'll just leave it at that.
yeah, that's really interesting. I loved Richard Rowland and Peugeot's sort of interpretation of fairy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they're a collision of liturgy and hagiography. It's this place where scripture meets earth. Um, and it's like he calls, like, these are the angels that took a neutral stance in
The
the war
neutral
against heaven
angels,
and earth.
yeah, that's actually what that's in Wolfram von Eschenbach's Parsifal. That's the Grail is
Hmm.
actually a stone in that version, and it's
Wow.
actually left by the neutral angels.
Yeah. Because they are like, it is a really incredible thing, because one of the great things that I like about capoeira
Well,
is
that like neutral is what? Neutral is not right. So
yeah, neutral
the,
is
even the angelic realm is caught up in the duality, right?
yeah, and it is this, like, neutral is a place, not an ideology. It's, I mean,
Yes.
neutral act, like an action, those things aren't, actions are harder to be defined as neutral. Like,
almost
I don't know,
they
like,
actually I don't think there is such a thing as like you're going to
no,
have to right.
yeah, it's just like Switzerland was a neutral country, and it's like, oh yeah, cool. So they didn't participate, and you see it as a country, you're like, oh, that's okay. But then you see the individuals' actions they had to do to become neutral. They weren't neutral,
Right.
and that was like the interesting thing. Like the stuff that in capoeira, there's an interesting because it's an if it's an African tradition that comes from Brazil via Angolan and Nigerian slaves, and they have a religion. They have their own Vodun African spiritism within it, and quite honestly, I think it's incredibly compatible to the point that there are versions of it as well. But they talk about they talk about that there is one God, and then there are 400 aspects of
Mm-hmm.
God. And they're the aspect of fire, of battle, of war, of love, of hope, and all of these different things that they can put in. And you can embody these, and you can embody these perspectives, you can articulate these perspectives. It's one of these places where you see the earth that you're in really, really come to life with the spirit, because that's a place where everything can start to become, that's where it's a place where you can see um, things fit into a more grander vision. Because it, like, one of the hardest things I always like had to reconcile with Christianity was this anti-pagan sort of idea and belief and stuff like that. And then, you know, the more I sort of listen to you guys, the more I sort of listen, the more it's like, it's not explicitly true, or at least it's not true in the
Well,
worst
even
way
I
you
mean, well,
think of.
even Augustine said that there was there was a but like essentially a single tradition that had been handed down through the ages, and that Christianity is but its current and final form.
Mm, yeah,
So,
I mean that's the only way that Christianity can be true.
well, I've like, this is the thing that I don't think I've said this about John, like, but I don't know if I've ever said it to John because wouldn't want to come. I like John and I wouldn't want to come off as insulting because and I don't mean this in an insulting way, but to
Hmm.
me he's reinventing the wheel. Like Chris, he is actually from the ground up. He's actually just reinventing Christianity, which is already the religion that is not a religion.
Yeah, it's what Chesterton did with Orthodoxy, where he was just like, I went to find a new country where
Yeah.
I was no longer going to be stained, and then I found that that country was England and it was my own.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and I
Um,
think I don't know if that's I don't know if he'll just. I don't, and I don't really think it matters because I don't.
no,
Again,
I think
it's
it's
like
useful.
Christ will find you on any path.
Yeah, and yeah, that's why I think that's why I think it's useful because, I mean, before I was Christian, I was Buddhist,
Right.
and like I studied in Thailand. I deeply read it. I deeply understood it. I actually went because, you know, Australia. I went to a Lutheran school, and I actually had a really good dialogue with my pastor about it because, you know, most pastors are just happy that somebody cares about something vaguely, something spiritual. They don't just take it
Right.
as something arbitrary. And I was like,
Right.
this is awesome.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, and like, you know, I inevitably kind of went into nihilism within Buddhism because unless you are unless you are in a Buddhist household, unless you're in a Buddhist community, I don't think I don't think you are Buddhist. I think
Right.
you're putting on what you can, and
Sorry.
I don't
You're
necessarily that
trying to
doesn't I,
avoid. You're trying to avoid your cultural expression.
yeah, like when I was in Laos, I did a temple stay, and I met the abbot, and we woke up like I woke up with the novices. I woke up with a bunch of 12 to 16-year-old boys who got up at 4:30 in the morning to go get their food from the side of the road when they were all giving alms out to the neighborhood, and that was all they could eat. And it's just
Right.
like that is a such a different
Here's
spiritual
the thing.
paradigm.
Why do you think that this is such an overwhelmingly a feature of the Christian world where you see people
Mm,
doing this. And I actually would say that it is Christianity is the reason that you
yeah.
see this as a feature of the Christian world, because at some level we actually do get it.
Yeah.
We've
100%.
we've culturally absorbed enough of the words of Jesus, we've culturally absorbed enough Bible that we actually
Hmm.
understand that Christianity is a religion that is not a religion, and we're bored of
Yeah.
that, and we want to explore everything else.
Yeah. To me, the reason why I think that, yeah, actually, because the things that we think Christianity is become not useless, or they almost become arbitrary. Like the last thing that I really became truly profound on was the crucifixion. Like I was just like, oh, like there's a lot of value. Like I saw, like, as a poet, I was just like, it makes sense that all this wisdom is in stories, because stories are an endless font of information, and you actually have to engage with them. You have to be in a relationship with the story. So that was really cool about, learning about the parables and learning about there's a reason why he was a carpenter. There was a reason all this stuff. But the historical event when I was like a kid and someone explained what Jesus did, I don't get it. I didn't. I like it was. It's to understand the depth of it is to really understand it in a mystical relationship
Right.
with yourself. If you do not engage with Jesus and the cross with yourself, if you don't put yourself right in front of that cross and try to really say you're there, then
Well,
it's
that's
literally as,
right. That's what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed, like,
yeah,
to share in his resurrection. We also share in his death.
yeah, and it's
And
and it's so hard. It's actually really, it's something that we don't communicate well, or maybe it's something we
I
can't
think we're
communicate
just, I
well.
think we're kind of, I think we're kind of fumbling about doing it badly, though. I don't think we're getting every. I don't actually think it's all. I think we get way too worried about things. I really do. That includes, by
True.
the way, that includes, by the way, the meaning crisis. I think that the meaning crisis is a gift from God,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
think that the
Like,
meaning crisis is a gift from God because I think that we collectively needed to hit rock bottom,
oh yeah.
just
It
as
was
we
it.
individually do sometimes in order to be confronted with reality.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to be put into the position where you start reflecting. Like the thing about someone hitting rock bottom is they finally don't have anything else to blame.
Right.
Like, and it really is that. It's like people just get to project everything else onto it. Like that's the real problem with the social justice warrior mentality. It's like the problem is they think that they're right.
Right.
And it's like, I'm just like,
And the same
maybe,
goes with
but
it. And the same thing applies to the anti-social justice warrior movement. That
yeah,
is the problem. The problem is you think that you're right. And
yeah,
and you guys think you don't have to talk to each other.
yeah.
No, you
No,
do.
like, yeah. I think there's like a lot of, I because I've been watching a lot of more people on the anti-social justice warrior. Like, it's interesting. Either they've given up and they've stopped and they can't do it, they don't want to do it, it's too much, or they've allowed themselves to be more self-critical and more just curious. They're not even like um doubtful of their positions. They're probably still like Sargon of Akkad. I've been following him for a while. He is way less certain about everything that he says right now than he did when he was in the beginning. He was there to fight. He was there to oppose. Now he's just like, I've been reading this. I've been understanding that. And the more I realize, and it's like, oh, so
Right.
now
I
you're
think
understanding
right.
it.
So I think we don't. I think a lot of times I tried to say this. I tried to explain this to Benjamin Boyce a long time ago
Mm,
on when Boyce sat in um on PVK's Q&A.
mm-hmm,
This was way back. Must have been probably 2 years ago.
mm-hmm.
And I I don't think he's read Barfield, and I tried to explain what I was talking about. But what I
Hmm.
really think that what the woke are upset about is the withdrawal of participation. This is what they're actually angry about. They're mad because the world is disenchanted. And I think Lindsay kind of sees that. Lindsay kind of sees that to a certain extent, but he doesn't like enchantment and he doesn't like mysticism.
Hmm.
And he doesn't realize
Hmm.
that that's a completely valid thing to be longing for.
Yeah. And that's the reason why like woke people always hide into identity because in a materialist sense, your identity is where you can find
Right, because they're
enchantment
in
again.
this closed circle and they don't, because they're in this closed circle of materialism, it's like they don't
Hmm.
have any other way to express it
Yeah.
because the
Like,
actual, because the circle is closed. But that the circle is breaking open, right, as we speak,
mm,
and it's breaking open more and more, and more people are becoming open to what's beyond that closed circle that we've created for ourselves.
yeah,
And
definitely.
hopefully that will mean that people can start talking each other to each other again. I would hope.
Yeah, that is gonna be interesting. It's hard because like I think it a lot of what good dialogue was before was sort of almost trying to put to ignore your own sentiments or to ignore or to put them into a to box the conversation into a
Yeah.
place where you could allow it. And yeah, it's an interesting thing. Like I'm trying to imagine it. Like one of the best conversations I remember seeing, like one of the things that I like looking at is like looking at how people used to discuss things back when, they didn't need to pull fire alarms and
Yeah.
call people racists and stuff like that. And I like the when The Life of Brian came out in Britain,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
the church condemned it. And
Yeah.
it's on
Yep.
YouTube. There's a
Yep.
debate between Michael Palin and John Cleese and
Yep.
an archbishop and a priest. And they did not pull any punches. They were like going really hard at it for each other. But the humor was there,
Yep.
the consolation was there, the unnecessity for the other person to change their mind. Like they didn't need I don't we didn't they didn't demand that the other person stop believing their evil thought. Um because I think that is true. I think people like I I think with these wars breaking, the hope that I have, and I'm hoping more walls collapse more quicker because I think there are some people that are feeling like they're treated like enemies still, and they're
Mm-hmm.
treated like villains, and
Mm-hmm.
they shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like I was, I I don't know if I've watched a little bit or a little bit of it watched me really, but like I was following Andrew Tate for a little bit, and I was like trying to really see what he was. And I think he actually has a lot of really good things to talk about. I think a lot of what he has to not that's not good is mainly modern things like just get rich, have things and stuff like that. But even even his view of wealth isn't actually materialist. His view of wealth isn't materialist. His view of wealth is be in a place where you can be comfortable with what you want to do in your life. It's actually not about the cars and the women and all of that type of stuff. But the interesting thing was everybody is leveling all of the criticisms at him and everybody who appreciates him. And the thing that I was like, these people don't know that Andrew is actually what Tate is actually doing to a lot of people is he's giving them hope in their belief,
Mm.
not in believing in what he says. But like, I don't know if you've ever seen a video of him, but I don't think you could find a more arrogant
I
person.
know next to nothing about him. I think like I saw some Paul Vanderklay play some clips of him at
Yeah,
one point. I've never seen any video of his. I don't know anything about him, but I will say this. I will say this
mhm,
without knowing anything about him
yeah,
is that sometimes people can hear a good message even from a bad messenger.
yeah, yeah. That's it. I actually like, and I think a lot of people are finding it easier to condemn him versus actually wrestle with the message. Like, and that's what I think is really an interesting thing, is just like, oh, like men in relationships appreciate respect. It's like, how dare you demand this of women and stuff. I was like, no, 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 like that's true. Like you can engage with these things in a dialogue. It's not
Mhm.
about like it's that
Well, who
projection
doesn't
versus
want to be
reflection.
respected in a
Yeah,
relationship,
exactly.
man or
And it's like,
woman?
well, yeah, that's it. It's like we see these things, and a lot of men almost like they take this as a desirous thing, but it's just like, well, like take that into account now, buddy. Like don't just say everybody's doing it wrong because you're not getting respected. Probably look at the fact that you're not getting respected because of what you're doing
Mhm.
and because of what you're actually doing. Because when you see your beliefs in the same way that you talk about how you criticize your Christian anarchism,
Mhm.
like
I do.
if you're like if you're right, what you believe should come back to you. And if it's not coming back to you, then maybe the world's not the thing that's wrong. Maybe it's you.
Right. Well, this is
And
all.
it's that.
This is always where we need to look first.
Hmm. And
Um.
it's really interesting because it's the reflections that people are struggle to do.
Yeah. Right. Well, because that's the hard part.
Yeah,
Because that
it's the.
that means taking responsibility.
Hmm. Yeah, and it like yeah, it means struggle, and it means working, it means apologizing, and it means realizing, and it means knowing that like the work's probably going to be even more harder now because you're doing it. But it's also the only place with hope.
You want? Would you like to hear my answer to my own challenge to my own Christian anarchism?
Oh, please.
So Christian anarchism is very much not like 19th century utopian anarchism,
Hmm.
and it
The only
actually
context I
does.
have for anarchism, aside from your what you do, is Michael Malice.
Right. Yes.
So
Michael Malice and I would agree on a lot. Um, but I think that I don't have his elitism, and I don't think that I don't believe in the legitimacy of coercion. I believe in authority, but I don't believe I believe in
Mhm.
authority and I don't believe in power,
Okay.
because power is what people who don't have authority resort to.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
essentially, I here's where I would agree with Malice is that utopia is not the goal,
Hmm.
and you should there no one should be able to arbitrarily who you form community who you form community with.
Hmm.
You should be able to form community with people that you want to form community with,
Hmm.
and you
And what's your rest and what do you and how do you wrestle with it and what do you come up with?
well I mean I wrestle with it because it's there are issues in the larger world that
Hmm.
my conception does not address, because conception is very my conception my political thinking is very localist, very communitarian, and
Hmm.
essentially it's just like I don't care about national politics at all.
Yeah.
It's just not even my
Hmm.
concern. Those those people are too far away for me to be
Yeah.
concerned with.
Hmm.
They're so outside my sphere of influence that
Hmm.
it's not for me to worry about. My
Yeah.
concern is my concern is to try to build positive community where I'm at,
Hmm. Yeah.
and not to use coercion or violence
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
process of doing that.
Yeah. Not to
And I
say that it's
don't
better
and
than another community.
I generally don't vote.
Yep.
I now here's the thing. I sometimes I can give in to the temptation of proximal betterment and do something
Hmm.
that is against my principles. So
Hmm.
I went to Iowa at my own expense to volunteer for Andrew Yang's presidential campaign back when
Mm,
that was the thing, because I
yeah,
thought like this was significantly different enough from
yeah,
what from the path that we were on that it was worth supporting, because I
yeah.
thought maybe there's a chance of breaking out of a bad pattern and
Hmm.
making some movement toward a better future. And also,
Yeah, that's really good.
Wendell Berry's a Christian anarchist, and Wendell Berry supported Yang too.
Yeah,
That made it really easy for me to rationalize. It's like, oh, Wendell's on board.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. There you go. All right, yeah. Tick one to the box into it. Yeah, it's interesting. Like Australian politics is, I don't even know where to begin with. It's like everything is so intentionally vague
Oh,
and
really?
and unaccountable.
Hmm.
Like I don't. Yeah, no. So to this day,
How are your local politics though? Are your local politics just as so? I'm Here's the thing: is like I could see myself being involved in local politics, even with my
hmm,
principles, except for the fact that the area I live in Olympia, which is the state capital of Washington State, and it's
yeah,
like there's no ideological diversity within
yeah,
Olympia politics at all. It's all progressive left liberal, and that's all there
yeah.
is.
We're very middle of the ground in Adelaide. Which is pretty good. There's nothing too crazy that comes up and comes in. Like, we handled the pandemic probably like middle of the road to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
There was no forced policies or anything like that, but
Right.
some private businesses were probably encouraged and everybody was definitely like,
We had some guys from Melbourne in the estuary leader group that I was in for a while, and they had horror stories about what was going on
yeah,
there.
Melbourne, Jesus. I mean, yeah, like a large lot of America was a lot worse and stuff like that. But yeah, it was hard. But no, local politics, majority of, it's like it's that Game of Thrones quote, we care about our own keep and we don't really care about the power struggles. So we normally leave the people sort of they normally just get to chop up large federal funding and they always just worry about a lot of funding, which seems to be this ever shrinking thing. And those seem to be the really big crimes that politically they keep going. And in terms of everything else, like we had, um, yeah, increasing licensure, increasing small business opportunities, and then increasing tax on top of it. So it's just like it's always both at the same time. So
Mhm.
you can never really be too mad at any particular party or any particular person.
Is it as factionalized as American politics? Is it like
Yeah, I would say it is, but it's nobody goes around accusing you of being a Democrat or like this is where like I'm not entirely sure if the Australian parties, but we're upside down. So our right wing party is Liberal
hmm,
and our left wing party is Labor. So Labor and Liberal are the names of the parties.
right? That actually makes
And
more sense.
yeah, 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 it does.
Probably because your left is more real left. We just have see in America the problem is that we just have liberalism only.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's all both
It's
parties are liberal. You just have left
yeah,
liberal and right liberal. And so as much as people will talk about Marxism, there's no
yeah,
Marxism. There's no
yeah.
real left.
No,
there's not even labor. It's just
yeah. Like how far?
progressive.
Like you
There's
get
progressivism, which is
yeah,
mostly cultural
yeah,
and not
definitely.
economic.
Yeah, but like
And
you guys would be Marxist if you were like 20 years after free healthcare.
yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
It's
right.
just like you're
Yeah,
nowhere
people are
near it.
yeah. Yeah. People are after
Yeah, it's like
people are having to go fund me in order to get critical life-saving surgeries in this country. So yeah, we're
yeah,
not in danger of there's Marxism is
no,
not a looming threat, folks.
yeah, no, like we have like yeah, we got all the problems of every bit, I think, is the best way to put it politically. Um, but like people forget we haven't had a full termed prime minister since 2007.
Oh, okay.
With like the
Interesting.
because they're because they're not a president, they're a
Right.
representative of the party.
Right.
So if the party deems them, they get swapped out and changed and keisted, and it just kept happening. And I think people realized it was a really good political weapon to distract against the individual's performance, because they were comparing themselves now against one person in the party, and then one person in the opposition as well. To most of us, we just saw that as an absolute dog's breakfast, and was just like, I was like, honestly, I just want Belgium. I just still want Belgium for a little bit, where they just don't have any ruling leaders for a bit. There's nothing changes. Everybody still has the same crappy lot that they're given politically. You know, arts has this much funding, everything, but no one runs it. No one tells us what to do, and just they sit in their corner and think about it for a minute. Because I think there's an interesting thing. We have our MAGA, we have our populist sort of cultural people.
If we really believe in the power of distributed cognition, then
Mm,
isn't that an outmoded way of doing things anyway?
yeah, yeah. Like it was like the guy who's like the wants to do the full libertarian Donald Trump stuff. He's just like, yeah, do it. Also, I own a coal mine, so it's just like I'm like, yeah, okay, let's see how this goes.
Yeah.
Um, he's like, I own nuclear and all of that type of stuff. It's interesting, like the impact I can you can have within local politics. I think is a little bit easier. I've been
Yeah.
noticing that a lot more stuff is actually getting taken away from local government, and a
Mm.
lot of small institutions are sort of being sort of chopped away.
I think
And I don't know,
yeah, I think that's kind of like the story everywhere.
yeah,
More and
like
more centralization of everything.
yeah, my partner keeps going, oh, that means that there's less red tape and it's more efficient. And I'm just like, it also means that the people who we're dealing with have no idea what we're talking about.
Right. Right. That's what
That's
it's
more
dumb to be.
important.
Yeah. Why should you be governed by people that you don't know and have never met?
Yeah, it's like this is the problem that I see with people complaining about artificially generated art. It's like I think there is a real problem that comes from it, but it's the wrong problem. Like it's not that like a robot is stealing your art. The
Mm-hmm.
problem is a robot is stealing your audience. Like you're
Mm.
losing your art gallery, you're losing your reason to talk to other people, because people have decided that it's much easier and better to have a picture of them in their art, cost nothing, and take 2 seconds to make. And because
Well,
of
that's
that,
efficiency is if efficiency is the only thing that matters, then
mm,
of course AI art wins.
yeah, yeah. Oh, like Tolkien, I was reading more on fairy stories, and Tolkien says like he has like a weird future. He has a weird like Nostradamus moment. He's just like where he talks about dress and fashion sense, and he's just like, well, maybe we will change the way we dress and dress in loose clothes with zips as fasteners. I was like, good one. And but he also says like, we'll sacrifice everything to the game of trying to just go faster,
Yeah.
and that's all we're trying to do.
Tolkien vacillated
And
between Christian anarchism and Christian monarchy, by the way. Just
I think
FYI.
that's yeah, I like that's my sort of
He
prop.
joked that
That's
he
my
couldn't decide with whether he would rather have Christian anarchism or just an inept
yeah.
inbred king.
I like the idea of like we talk about faith and stuff like that, and it's about embracing a paradox. And so like politically, I always say I'm an anarcho monarchist.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, there's
it's just
yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah. That actually
and it's just
that's the
like yeah,
funny thing though, is that it's very weird. This is something I've noticed for a long time. Christian monarchists and Christian anarchists agree on about 95% of the terms.
yeah,
And then it's just like somehow it's like they have all the same premise. It's almost like they have all the same premises in the argument. And then it's like they draw opposite conclusions somehow
yeah.
from the exact same premises.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting thing. I think the same happens with traditional right and left. Like my friends, um I would call him quite left wing, but he's an ecologist, and he talked about it, was like, wait, actually, I am a conservative. I like conserving things. It's like, yes, I know, but like, and you realize if you stack all these values, they get so close, but there's a flip. Um, and I think I mean, I do think the flip is perspectival. I think one of those. I think the monarchism debate, in my opinion, is like the monarchism within my anarcho-monarchism is, I don't know, like we're like the political state should be like water. Like
Mm,
if you engage it softly, will be soft.
mm,
If you engage it hard, will be hard as well. And
mm.
that's like everybody go about their own business and do what they need to be and do what they need to do to understand and be part of the world. But have a thread of something that you can draw together so that if something happens where you're required, then you'll be okay. And that's like that embodiment of the paradox of that viscosity, like
Mm.
trying to be like oobleck, like that cornstarch where you can walk on it
Right,
with enough
right, right,
tension.
right.
And because like monarchism, the monarchistic thing is it's almost like it's the ideal. It's like the
Right. Well,
anarchistic is the
Kathleen
mode.
Rain, the poet Kathleen, you know, put the poet Kathleen Rain.
I don't know.
Okay, so Kathleen Rain, she argues that monarchy is not a political institution at all.
Mhm.
That it's actually a sacred institution.
Yeah, I would 100% say that.
So
Like, I
that
mean, Peterson even calls it a symbolic
right, yeah.
institution.
Peterson talks about it like that, yeah, as
And
well.
it's true. Like you look at the Japanese monarchy and it is in that way as well. And um I think it is like the problem is again, the problem with a monarchy is if you project onto it. If you project onto it and go like, well, I mean, if this is a power, they say no here, they say yes here, therefore like, and so you start to see them as this corrupt institution. And I do think that that's when you have when like a monarchy can go awry for
I'm
the
okay
same
if
reason
we
of
can have a monarch that has absolutely no power. Even as an anarchist, I can accept that. Like a
yeah
monarch who just has no power. He's the monarch. What does he do?
yeah
Nothing.
like the monarch is to reflect and support on decisions of the state. Essentially, it's to go that is
This is essentially where the British monarchy is at this point. It doesn't really do anything.
yeah, well, not a great case example for it now. I think, but it no, you're right. I think the idea is like, so to me, the ideal is like you're not meant to put your like if a monarchy is the judge, a monarchy is the, sorry, not the judge, it's the ideal. You should have a relationship with it in which your life is actually relatively neutral in accordance to yourself. It's like whether or not you do anything, it shouldn't really change your life for good or for ill. It should only like everything should be done in a reflection. It's just like I'll go towards the monarchy because it will benefit the monarchy, and the monarchy will then benefit sort of the state. But in terms of my own well-being, I'll be good for good or for ill. I'll be alive and I'll be functioning and I'll laugh. Like it's you've been a line cook. I've been in hospitality as well. I'm sure you've had great cooking jobs, and I'm sure you've had terrible cooking jobs. And it takes a while to leave those bad cooking jobs because you know what? You get a paycheck, you
Yeah,
get a laugh, you get a
yeah,
laugh in. You
yeah.
can you're not
Well,
miserable
I
all the time in
even
a
the
bad job.
worst jobs is like I loved the work so much that
Mm,
I was never very unhappy even in the worst jobs.
yeah, that's
So
it. Like I and that was like that was the thing to always remember was like things are roughly the same. Like it in a sense. I think in terms of like trying to treat it as something that is like a propositional declarative, I think it is hard. Like because when you declare something, you implicitly declare the opposite, and you also try you're trying to I don't know what the word is, but like people don't hear the feminine, people don't hear the unheard because they have to see it. They have to see it in the way that you act. They have to see it in the way that you engage with it. And it's hard. Like I always like the there's the Orthodox triptych of Christ, the Emperor, with John the Baptist and Mary. Like I always keep thinking back to that as like Mary is doing the smallest thing.
Mm-hmm.
She's got her hands together and she's leaning into Christ. Whereas John the Baptist is looking like me, very hungover, with a giant scroll and script and bold text and pushing it out and just screaming it at him. And it's
Right.
like, it's both.
Mm-hmm.
It's always both. And I think the interesting thing is it's always inevitable like that. I think that's the main thing that people say about anarchism is like, oh well someone with the most power will eventually take control because everybody doesn't care about power. And it's like, well, okay, but everything he said, everything the anarchist says is still true. It's like to make it survive the most, you have to have a discursive environment.
Well, and I also think I think people were thinking of it as if it were some sort of like, again, I'm not like, in some ways, almost all modern anarchists are like post anarchists. They're not like the idealist anarchists of the 19th century where they believe in like some kind of universal anarchistic
Mm,
situation. It's just,
yeah.
they're just like, nah, just leave me alone so that I can form community who I want to, and
Yeah.
not fund your forever wars, and not
Yeah.
participate in
No.
your violent systems.
Yeah, I think yeah, people are slowly realizing that
And also the other thing is that,
it
guess
all
what,
stacks
there
into
are
it.
stable Christian anarchist communities that have existed for over 500 years. The Anabaptist sects are exactly that. That's what do you think the Hutterites and the Amish and the
Yeah.
Mennonites are, folks?
Yeah.
Christian
Yeah.
anarchists that have had successful communities for centuries. So don't tell me it doesn't
Yeah.
work.
No, I think it definitely works. I mean honestly, like going back to Tolkien, it's the hobbits.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
There
Exactly. It's the
was
hobbits. Yeah.
there, there was a mayor. He
Yeah.
did nothing.
He did nothing. Right.
And
Yeah.
that's what he had to do. And
Right.
like there has to be there is like always a negotiation with barriers and there is a there is divides that happen within those groups.
And there's
But
going to
those
be, yeah, there's
divides,
going to be disputes, and yeah, of
yeah,
course.
like
Where
you make
humans
it
are still,
close if,
yeah, anarchists don't believe that you can change human nature.
no, yeah, like there are going to be strangers. Like there's always going to be the stranger. There's always going to be that sort of networking. And I've been reading The Language of Creation again, and one thing I really liked about the Christian address of poverty is charity, because that's the only way that you can virtuously approach a poor person and they can still be poor. Like you're not trying to change who they are. You don't want them to become rich. You don't want them to become stable. Like the stranger is still the stranger, but you engage in hospitality. Like to me, I think hospitality is one of the most important things that you can teach a person.
Mm.
It's like I think in giving them the art of conversation, of knowledge, of culture, of knowledge of an art, and an ability to offer that to somebody is like is one of the is easily like one of the greatest foundations of being, in my opinion. To begin with, I listen a lot to I've listened 3 times to an audiobook by Okokuro Kakuza called The Book of Tea. Have you heard of it?
Mm-mm.
Great. It's free. Try it. It's
I
fantastic.
will. I will.
It's he was he was an artistic critic who wanted to talk about preserving Eastern ideals in a heavily westernizing Japan. So he wrote this book in like 1909 in English because he was like, people need to actually express this. And the only place East and West have converged is the teacup. And so it was in the idea of like, it's actually within communion with each other. It's within
Yeah.
providing space that you can actually incorporate philosophy, you can incorporate nurturement, you can heal and reconcile, and you can also devote. Like that is where devotion happens. Like he talks about how like the relationship
Well,
to the
yeah, look
art.
at the dining table of a hospitable person
Mm,
is about as close to paradise as you can get on this earth.
amen. Yeah,
Because
100%.
because you were because it engages every level of your being, and it does it
Mm,
in a very embodied way. But also, you're going to have at that table, you're going to have enriching conversation. If it's a truly hospitable person,
yeah.
they're going to be surrounded
And
by
that's it. You
interesting
have to,
people who want to be at that table.
yeah, and that's it. It requires both parties to participate. Like you can't just do what you want in a bar. Like you can't just go in and like turn all the tables upside down and vomit on the toilet and go back and around and all of that type of stuff. Like you actually have to be a serviceable person. Like this is going back to what I said about artificial intelligent art and stuff like that. It's the problem isn't the art. The problem is the audience. Like people are now just consuming art because they think it's good image. In the Book of Tea, it says one should approach a painting in the same manner one should approach a prince. Like art should be something that you reverence, that you reflect, that you take in. And you know, I think a lot of art is trying to provoke and trying to sort of create a violent reaction because
Mm-hmm.
that's the closest it can get to a good relationship because they've the only thing that you can quantify, like in a material way, like you talk about the only way that you can quantify a relationship is attention.
Mm.
And attention is not all of
I
a
don't think that's
relationship.
all. Yeah, I think that's certainly an aspect of it is the attention. But I actually talked about this a bit in my conversation with Chris Green, which was actually on beauty. And I actually
Mm,
think that in the kind of movement of modern and postmodern art to draw to draw itself toward what is not which is not classically considered beautiful is
mm-hmm.
actually a deeply Christian thing to do.
Yeah, I remember that. I
Because
remember that
right,
part.
because I think ultimately it's inspired by the beauty of the crucified one,
Mm-hmm.
which
I
is
agree. I think that's the you are trying like they're trying to emulate the totality of the Christian experience, which is like the prayer of
right
Saint
because we
Patrick,
just
Christ
keep being
before me,
Christian
Christ
in spite
behind me.
because it's like we keep being Christian in spite of ourselves, even as the
Yeah,
even as we think we're totally post-Christian.
yeah, no, it's so and it's precisely because I think Christ is this eternal mystery that people will never be able
We
to
can't quit
escape it.
him. We think we can quit
No,
him, but we can't.
like I was looking into etymology of mystery, and the Proto-Indo-European root is mer, mei, me, and it means to close in. And so like the mystery of Christ is the closes in, but you can't see where it closes in because it just keeps taking everything in again and again. And I think it does that because it does capture the totality in in a true way. I think the problem, like, so and that's why the problem isn't the art, because the art
Well,
itself
it's a
does
total
have Christ.
it's an open because it's not a close. That's the thing though is like it's all encompassing, but it's not
Yeah,
enclosed. It's not enclosed because Christ is ultimately infinite.
yeah. Like it's the total embodiment. But like to the point in the art, like the problem in the same way that I think you talk about how the gift of the meaning crisis, and we always talk about the crisis of masculinity and stuff like that. Like what we're looking at is one half of an issue, and we're looking at a separation of what used to be a unity. And postmodern art to me is not an artist. To postmodern artist is an artist trying to talk to himself
Mm-hmm.
and a the audience of art are just trying to excite their internal desires. And they both have a yearning to come together and to share in that experience with each other. But there's not the humility of the artist to present something that doesn't need an explanation. And there's also not the sacrifice of the reader or the audience member to give in their agency to the artist for that point, because it's not attention, it's agency. Because you can watch Star Wars a million times and you can get the same thing, but the thing that actually affects you is what you do with it.
Right. There has to be, I think, well, the thing that actually affects you, there's like, it's the thing that actually affects you becomes something more than just consumption.
Yeah.
Because there's a there because there's an inner penetration where where you are entering into it and it is entering into you.
Yeah, 100%. Like it is that true curiosity. It's going back to fairy. It's like you're innocent again, where there is nothing that you're holding back. Everything you talk is open. Like talking to a child, they will tell you everything. They will go on and on and on and on and on. Like my daughter can't
This
even
is why
speak and
it's
she's
so
doing that.
bad. This is why it's so bad. This is why I fear for the immortal souls of art critics. Because no, I'm serious. There's
Yeah.
something really profoundly terrible about engaging with a work of art as a critic. That you can criticize a work of art after the fact, but as long as
Mm-hmm.
when you're in the experience of engaging with a work of art, whether that be whether you
Mm,
be watching a film or looking at a painting or reading a
mm.
poem or reading a novel,
Take it out. Take yourself out.
you need to enter into it
Open.
fully to allow
Yeah.
the artist to present their
Mm-hmm.
vision to you without critique
Yeah,
and
100%.
to give it the chance of penetrating into you, and
Mm-hmm.
if you penetrating into it, to allow that to happen. And then when you give it your best effort and then nothing happens because it's a bad piece of art,
Yeah.
then maybe. But a lot of times what happens is people go in with a mindset of critique to begin with.
Yeah. Oh,
This is why, by the way, sometimes people when people go in to see a film with low expectations, they can be surprised by it.
mm. Yeah, that's really interesting. Like I'm thinking about all of the things that I've seen and my appreciation of them and how it comes into it. Because like the first thing that I thought of was my terrible opinion of the Rings of Power. Um, but to me, like, yeah, like I do agree with it. I think I don't a critic is the wrong word for a good art critic is not denigrating the piece. A good art
Right.
critic is connecting the art to other arts, to other
Yeah,
things, to
that's right.
higher values and to lower values.
And the best criticism does do that.
Definitely. Like there's a guy I listened to for decades now, but he's like zero punctuation, and he's a game critic, and he has a speech where he's just like, I'm not a reviewer of games. I'm a critic of games because you critique art. You review you review tools. You review things because you look over. You just say what it is, and that's what it is. But a critic is somebody that explains their experience and connects their experience to another thing. Like
Which is
you can always
right. So that's a different that's probably a different and better understanding of the process of critique.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the problem is the fact that it has to be a job, and you realize that you're never going to do that job well all the time. I
Yeah.
had a friend who worked at a restaurant. They got a one-star review from a food critic who had his date leave him before the entree.
Oh no.
I was like, of
That
course
might
you
have
had a terrible
impacted the
experience.
review. I'm just gonna
That
say.
might have affected the review.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like, I mean, I think about that with all the art that I loved when I was very young. Because if I can look at it now and go, oh, that's not that great. But because I was so young and I was like, I didn't have like, I don't know, the lenses or the ego in which I had, I could just believe it. I could just push into it. It's so much more connecting to me now. Like, again, you're allowed that place where you don't judge. I think, like, yeah, C.S. Lewis did do a very good job with Fairy, with all of the children in the first Narnia books. And the older they got,
Mhm.
even though they wanted to stay,
Yeah,
they had to go out. They had to sort of be out there.
right.
Because it's a lot harder, I think, to enter into Fairy the older you get. And I think people
Mhm.
should be very happy um, when they do get that experience. Like, I think it's interesting. Like, uh, the funny thing about really good art
And
is you
don't
can
waste so much.
always
And
mock it.
also, there's another thing that we do though as we get older is like we waste time like rationalizing those experiences away and
Yeah,
trivializing them
yeah.
as if
And
they
it's
don't
just like,
matter.
yeah, no,
It's like, oh
like
no, that's we
that's
actually ignore what our experience of it was,
yeah,
and
yeah.
we
With
make it lesser.
yeah, like any like it's like I don't listen to heavy metal that much, but I grew up listening to
My
Metallica
son,
and
my
Lamb of God.
my son is 22. He loves that. He's a big metal
Yeah.
guy.
And like I don't listen to it as much anymore, and like I have like a wide variety of taste. But whenever I listen to it, it reminds me of that individual person who just wanted to experience, just wanted to scream at the world. I was like, ah, oh,
I think it's
yeah,
a I don't know, like the energy of it is it's a young male energy, that
yeah,
music.
it
And I
really
think if
is,
you're and if you're getting older and you still like heavy metal, probably need to grow
it's
up,
hard.
which is not I mean, it's like heavy metal is good for what it is, and it's
Yeah.
probably a good music for young men to listen to. The
Mm.
music I prefer to listen to, I want to listen to music that's going to break my heart.
Oh
That's what I
God,
want.
yeah, 100. I think it's to look back on that experience. It is just trying to understand what you what you're almost not meant to understand. It's like things are like when you're that young, things are happening to you, and you're feeling things that you cannot possibly articulate.
Right.
Like you're just everything. You're getting angry. You're getting violent. You're hungry. You're
Right.
feeling alone. You're
And
feeling
that music
insufficient.
reflects your interior emotional state, and it
Yeah,
resonates with you.
and
And
it makes you triumphant over it as well.
yeah, right. Yeah,
Like that's the
absolutely.
thing that like because I think a lot of people listen. I think a lot of people have listened to themselves and they become the victim of the heavy metal music upon them. But the kid allows themselves to become that person still.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely.
Like and that's it. And like the reason we
Okay,
like
so this
things that
brings us
can
back to
yeah
the crisis of masculinity. I think this is a natural bridge
yeah
to this. Which okay, so I think that this is the reason we have a crisis of masculinity is Christianity too. We are
mm,
trying to figure out as because Jesus kills the heroic archetype. He kills it.
yep
He absolutely he crucifies it, and it is buried with him. So we have to like
mm,
that means that leaves us with trying to figure out a different story. And I don't think like and we're still like if you look at our storytelling patterns, like we're still trying to figure this out. And then occasionally
mm-hmm,
you'll see a film or a piece of art that actually like does kind of break through to a new storytelling pattern. But
mm.
we're
It's
really tend to be stuck in this cycle of stories of redemptive violence where it's like we know that
mm-hmm,
like we're having this tension between Jesus and the hero who we can't quite let go of, who does the redemptive violence on our behalf, because we
yeah
know as Christians we know it's wrong.
yeah like well it's the idea is like I'm going to bring up Lindsay again because he talks about the West as Athens meeting Jerusalem. and Jerusalem is surrender, and Athens is dominance. Like, and we're trying to reconcile the dominance with our surrender. So, like, you always see like the final thing in nearly everything is it always happens at the darkest moment, and it
Mhm.
happens in the moment of most surrender, and that's where victory is. But it
Right.
still has to. It's trying to bring violence in. To me, I want.
Well,
Let me
it's like,
think
I mean,
about.
it's like my strength is made perfect in weakness. We're still like, we have not even begun to come to grips with that.
No, definitely, and I think I don't think you can I don't think you actually need to throw away redemptive violence um, as a concept of something to pursue. What needs to happen is we need to understand that violent tendency. Like it's like the martial artist principle of like when you really truly understand violence, you will do everything that you can to avoid it. Like I was thinking about this, a while ago because people were much more comfortable with violence every decade previous.
Right.
Like every 10 years, you got like, I mean, I was a bartender for 10 years. I saw two fights. Like anybody a generation before me, it was every week. And then going even further back, I had like an old high school teacher who went
When
to
I
a
was in
rural,
when I was in college and drinking heavily, I used to start fights almost every time I drank.
yeah, almost every time. Like, and it was just a normal thing. And I had friends, I would go back even further in like a rural school. Kids would be so bored that they would fight each other for their lunches. And I think I think there is actually like a place where like violence has always been this thing that we've had to have
Yeah.
because it's it's a connection with our will, or it's a connection with our belief. Actually, it really is, because if you think you can do something, try to do it against another person. That's literally the ultimate test of like your belief in yourself. If you can do something to someone else, and that's why like it's immoral and so immediately, but it's one of those things that like there is no deeper test of that. Like to engage with reality in the flow state that we always talk about, the ultimate version of that to me is very specifically unarmed violence, because it's only you and it's only them, and you engage in meaning. And like again, I'm sure you would
And
say like during college,
and it's controlled.
yeah, and it's controlled, and it is that place where you're actually allowed a full exploration of yourself. Like, I mean, I'm sure there are people that you fought that you became friends with after the fact,
Almost always.
almost always. And it's like it's just like that's a relationship that men are losing, because while they are losing it, they're becoming worse at having it. Like people die instead of get injured. Like I remember listening to a Rogan, and there was a guy who's just like, martial arts doesn't do anything in a fight. People have guns. Like, I mean, and it's not much different over here. Like there are like no one gets shot,
But I don't think
fortunately.
most people who are studying martial arts aren't even doing it because they want to get in a fight,
No,
right? They're
no.
doing it for some other.
Most people want to do it because they can, because they can fight without needing to. And
Right.
that's the place. Like capoeira is not a violent martial art in the sense that we don't actually train contact. But like if you were to put Muay Thai and boxing and all of the contemporary modern violent martial artists,
Mhm.
they're putting themselves into a place where they can understand themselves more. And I think the hard thing about the story in masculinity, to bring it back to, is it's we require a thing to fight because we can't just you can't and to require a thing to fight requires an enemy, and
Mm.
that is the thing that's almost impossible within Christianity. Like
Right,
how
right. But I don't think that like competitive uh contact sport really rises to
mm,
the I mean to some, I mean there are some people who want to hyperbolically call that violence, but I don't really think
yeah,
I don't really think
that's it.
if we
Like
could have
you
a world where if we could have a world where um we would just play a rough aggressive sport against each other instead of conducting warfare, I think that's a win for everyone.
and there are people who are in those Muay Thai camps who are doing it just because they are that violent, and they will get into a fight regardless, and they will push too hard and they will hit too hard, and they will go out as well and they'll go crazy and all of that type of stuff.
I got kicked
I
out of
think
I got kicked out of the SCA. Do you know what the SCA is?
it's
It's a
no.
it's a historical recreation society, and part of what and what part of what they do is uh they do like they fight with like rattan swords and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
I was disinvited from my local group because
Did you
I
injure someone or?
no, not seriously. They just like no. We only go like
Mm,
half speed or something like that. And like I don't it's
yeah.
been a bias of my local group, but so yeah, I keep trying to talk my son into to going to there's a HEMA club in
He was
about
great.
30 miles away from us that I keep trying to convince him to go with me to.
Yeah, no, it's something that's fun. I think like um the crisis in masculinity is, to me, we've lost the power to decide what to do with our will, or we've decided, like people have decided that what we choose is wrong. Like I think there is like a place in which masculinity is or can be wrong, it can be tyrannical and can be violent. Toxic's the wrong word. Toxic
Mm-hmm.
is um to me, toxic is what happens when you leave something fragile to the side. And
Mm-hmm.
so someone being toxic is that's the result of somebody else. It's not a result of them. Being fragile is the
Well, I think
person's.
most of the people who are actually displaying genuinely toxic traits
Yeah.
are fragile and insecure, which is why they're
Yeah.
overcompensating for something.
Yeah, 100%. They're no like they I mean I didn't know that the I didn't I used to the Chris Williamson had a girl on to talk about why we became like there why there is a genetic thing for men to become abusive towards their partners, and because they that would instill into them what we would do to anybody that went near her.
Mm.
And so and that was and that because the only way that we could control her in this, like as that twisted toxic violent person, the only way that we could have a semblance of control or import or anything like that was physical.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just like this is what's going to happen, as opposed to being charismatic and being kind and
Well,
engaging in
yeah,
a
yeah.
relationship.
Well, the charisma. I'm glad you talked about charisma because I think that's like
Mm,
a lot of these things are people who don't have any natural authority, which I think is I don't think
hmm
we can avoid the fact that it is connected with charism in some way. Like,
yeah. It,
but part of what I mean, but the thing is like not all of charism is God given. There
no.
are actually traits that people who are naturally charismatic have
hmm
that you can emulate.
Yeah, 100%. Like that's what hospitality is.
Yes.
Like someone can that's not like you can teach people hospitality. Like you really can, because it's not about the grand gestures. Like charisma, like as people see it, is the same problem that people see with hospitality. It's just like, hey, come here. It's that guy with the fantastic humor and incredible stories and all of that stuff. It's not that. Charisma is about allowing yourself to be heard. It's about being receptive. Charisma is like, hey, I have something to say, and people will listen to you.
Hmm.
Like, and like being uncharismatic is not allowing yourself to instantiate yourself within the conversation, but it's also not instantiating the other person to be taken seriously. You could talk down to them.
Well, that's
You
the
could try.
thing about most people who are charismatic.
Yeah,
Like when people talk to them, they feel like they're being heard. It's
yeah,
part of why people
that's it.
like them. Like take Joe Rogan,
Yeah,
for example. It's like, why do you think people go on his podcast and talk for 3 hours? Because
yeah,
they feel like he hears them.
yeah. And he genuinely does. Like, I
Right.
mean, whatever his flaws and everything like that, he's just like, tell me more, man. I'm interested in what you're interested
And
in.
it's not
And
faking it.
no, yeah, like if he would be faking it, we would really
He
know by
says
now.
that. Like no, that's why nobody likes used car salesmen. It's like a used
Yeah,
car salesman is not charismatic.
yeah, yeah,
What all they're doing is trying to overcome your will.
yeah. That's it.
Good salesmen behave totally differently. And I was in sales for a number of
Yeah. Oh,
years.
it's something I always have a problem. I always like struggle with the personal training of like, how do you go up to somebody and go, hey, I got this for you and all that type of stuff. But it's just like, no, it's just
It's
like,
all honestly being good at sales is about being good at listening because what a good salesman
yeah,
does instinctively is they genuinely are matching need to
mm,
product. It's like,
yeah,
oh, I hear you have this need that you've just told me about or that I've asked you
hmm,
about and I've found out about. Hey, you know what? I have this thing to meet your need. And also,
yeah,
by the way, if you have that need, you may also find this, and this useful.
yeah. I think, and I think that's actually like the really interesting thing because it's engaging in the relationship. To go back to the crisis of masculinity, like I think a big problem is the modern, that is to sense, mode perspective on what masculinity is. And masculinity is status and on women and wealth, on power and strength and peer. And for some reason, we've decided to isolate all of them. And we've decided to commodify all of them as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to what they should be, which is they should be connected. It's like if you're good in your community, like be good in your community and have a good woman and have a good
Well, but you
partner
know what
and be a
though?
good father.
The more fragmented somebody is, the better a consumer that they are.
Yes, it's
Which is
true.
why, which is why capitalism doesn't dislike identity politics
Yeah, and it's
at
actually one
all
of the main reasons.
because it
Yeah,
actually creates new markets.
and this is an interesting thing because capitalism also loves ADHD.
Yes, it
And
does and
and
weaponizes it against
oh
you.
my god, it is so good at it too. Like I've been diagnosed. I toss and forth on medication, and that's a whole different thing. But like 5% of the population, that's it. ADHD. We have 5% of us, and we've through capitalism. I genuinely believe this, have dominated how people consume media. Because when someone with ADHD has an opinion on something, boy, we have a strong opinion on that thing. And you're going to hear that opinion way more than how anybody else like engages with it. Um, which is actually like a really, really important thing. Like someone with ADHD, in my mind, actually is harder to control or capture
Mm.
within this because our genetics, I believe, precede others. I think we are the hunters. I think we are like the people who were in the tribes that hadn't evolved out of into farmers. So we
Mm.
stopped. We couldn't care about the regular cycles and doing things every day for the sake of doing them. We had to engage with our reality. We had to dialogue with what we see in front of us, which is why when we're really good, we're probably incredible. But it's also really hard for us to maintain that calibration
Mm.
between our inside reality and our external reality as well. And it's yeah, I think like capitalism. I think the problem with capitalism is when it's viewed in its modern sense.
Hmm.
And I think the problem is you can
Yeah.
still use
Well,
capitalism
first of all, the
virtuously.
first thing we need to understand is a lot of people are under this mistaken impression that capitalism is synonymous with markets. It's not. Markets are
No,
inevitable.
yeah,
If you have human beings, you're going to have markets. So that's the first thing we
yeah,
need to understand is that
mm-hmm,
capitalism is not synonymous with markets. And yes,
mm-hmm,
definitely we've developed a particularly toxic form of capitalism,
mm-hmm.
and that is financial capitalism
Well,
because
yeah, like the
most
idea is like capital. It's turning everything into into a common value,
I don't know how it
and
is in
that's the
Australia,
problem.
but America barely builds anything anymore.
No, which I was genuinely shocked when I found out you guys are like agriculturally self-sufficient and you export stuff. I was like, I would not have even thought that. I would have thought that like everything else international, we rely on so much outside of ourselves because we do the same. Yeah, we don't make anything. We just had like a, our largest car dealership go to China and all of that type of stuff. And it's it's a war you can't win because it's a war on value. And if you value yourself, then you're going to be more expensive than someone who doesn't value themselves as highly as you. And I think that's actually what happens within like a capitalist society is like we realize the better off we become, how inherent our own value is.
Well, and also because
And
it's
then,
so hyper focused on efficiency,
mm,
we
yeah,
actually lose craftsmanship and quality under capitalism
yeah, yeah.
because they are secondary concerns, which is I think that's not just about capitalism. I think that's just kind of about like that's about the our overly quantitative frame in general.
Well, yeah, and like, and
What
I was
which
talking to a
partially
friend.
that explains partially why capitalism is so appealing to us, though.
Mm,
Like I think
definitely.
the less quantitative our frame becomes, the more we might look for other ways of doing things.
hmm I like, um, but it's interesting as well because there's a mindset that you can see that capitalism is trying to establish into a person that is insufficiency.
Right.
Like, and you see it in like impoverished countries, like anywhere you go where you would call it a developing country, like the main diet is sugar.
Mhm.
Like it's condensed milk, it's snacks, it's biscuits, it's Mars bars and Coca-Cola because it's what will work the quickest, the fastest, the best. And it's like, and it will never expire, it will never go bad. You can always have it. And if you get if you have enough sugar, then you can have some rice, you can have some bread, you can have some carbs. And like it's very hard to en- engage in good nutrition in these places, even though you probably can engage with it better in the West than in the West right now because of the price of things. But it's you see that like people can't think of themselves as needing value when they are in a place where they are like insufficient, when they're actually truly insufficient. And it's just like, and you're in a place where you can no longer, where you just have to get what works.
Right. Well,
Whereas like
that's like I did a conversation with my wife on this channel like quite a ways back. Um and I can't remember it's Maxford Max Neef, I think is the guy's name. It's
yeah,
he's it's an he's he's an economist that my wife is really into. And he has this concept of like pseudo satisfiers. Like that's like
oh
so
yeah,
we so that's like what we end up doing is that we end up
mm.
pursuing all of these pseudo satisfiers.
Yeah, and that's the problem with projection again, because you're doing what you think will work, even though like there is almost sorry, I got to set up.
No problem.
You're doing what you think will give you the value, like, and then you're no longer actually in the place that you actually are to adjust and address the problem, because you're going like, oh, I'm hungry, I'm insufficient, if I eat food I'll no longer am I hungry. And it's just like, well, yes, but you need to actually think about it as like, you can go for days without food. So
Mhm.
it's like, I'll be hungry, so if you eat now, okay, cool, no longer hungry, but you also might eat shit. So if you eat according to a value, and it's like, oh, I only eat healthy food, or I only eat like this type of stuff, then you're putting the value away from yourself, and you're trying to like separate this identity of insufficiency. Because if you put yourself into, like, through that insufficiency, you're projecting that into the ideal, and into that ideal you become captured, and you become having is good and not having is bad, and all food is good and no food is bad, or something like that. And you put yourself into a false paradigm where, like, the true idea is like, well, everything is a yes, so everything is okay now, according to the good value of what you want and what you want to do and who you want to be. What do you go from there?
Mhm.
Not what your experience is, or not what you know in yourself or lack in yourself. It's, yeah, I don't know.
No,
Don't
that's
think I
good.
got that one quite well, but
No, it's all right. It's all right.
yeah, it's an interesting thing because I see, like, yeah, capitalism is a strange thing because it's like there's three different worlds. And they're all class based, and I have no reference for what it would be like on this level of experience, and then at the high level of experience I'm just like, you're just
So,
making up numbers now.
let
And
me just kind of close with this suggestion to you. I would
yeah.
say, to me, capitalism and Marxism are both false narratives about freedom at the end of the
Mm,
day.
yeah,
And
I think that's true.
what really makes us true freedom is in God, and in doing what God does
Hmm.
and reflecting what God does. God
Yeah,
loves and God creates.
yeah,
If we want to be free, we will love and create.
yeah,
And
that's a really
and
good way
neither
to,
capitalism nor Marxism was particularly concerned with either.
yeah. Yeah, definitely. Oh man, no, you said the creation. No, you said creation. I actually think there's something really powerful about the masculine crisis in there. Is like people are losing their ability to impact the world with what they can make and what they can
Well,
do and stuff
let's
like
say
that.
this. Let's say this.
Yeah.
Let's say what the masculine value we can absolutely recover as being of ultimate worth. In fact, it is the virtue with which you can practice no other virtues, and that is courage.
Yeah.
And courage is actually related. It's, first of all, it is actually properly closely related to humility.
Mm-hmm.
The more humble you are, the less fearful you will be, and the more courageous you will be able to act. And
Yeah.
that allows you to act more faithfully in the world, and
Yeah.
therefore to act effectively in the world.
I think that's a fantastic place to to
Okay,
put a
all
pin
right,
in it.
let's end it on that. Hopefully we'll
Yeah.
talk again. It was good to talk to you, Charlie.
Yeah. Definitely. You too.
Yep, you bet.